Hi, I'm John Paul, and a really warm welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm delighted to have Darren Magee back on again. And what we're looking at today is having a conversation about red flags. I recorded 3 videos on dividing it into what are red flags, and then talked about why we might ignore them. Because for a lot of people, they seem very obvious, the kind of things that we're talking about. But a lot of people say that they don't notice them initially, potentially. And also, when they do, subsequently they stay and sort of endure them. And looking at the reasons for that, I think, is interesting. And then looking at how do we navigate red flag. So, as I say, Darren, thank you so much for coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me back again. It's nice to chat with you again, John Paul.
And I thought we could start by just from your point of view, what would you say would be kind of significant red flags in another person?
Okay, well, whenever we're talking about red flags, we're often talking about warning signs, but we have to remember that when we first meet someone, these warning signs are not overt. They're not always overt. They're not in our face. They're often quite hidden. They could be subtle. They could be under the radar. Also, someone might do or say something. You know, they could lose their temper. They could be a bit opinionated. They could, seem a bit selfish or whatever. They could just be having a bad day. There could be other things going on. So when you think of the red flags, I think more in terms of an indicator. So there could be an indicator in someone's behavior, but those indicators would be repeated. There'd be repeated patterns of behavior. They're not necessarily happening all the time and in the same situation, but you might see the same things manifest from time to time in different areas and in different relationships. I think paying attention to behaviors can be very useful in a lot of areas of our lives. You know, we pay attention to not just what's going on with other people, but even paying attention to our own reactions to some of those indicators.
Yeah. And in terms of the sort of key indicators that you would say were signs that there could be some sort of deeper problem, more ongoing problems with somebody for the relationship, what do you think people should pay particular attention to?
It would be difficult to know where to begin.
Right.
I think of the most obvious ones. Now, bear in mind, as I say, we can all be a bit like this from time to time. But if it's a romantic relationship, what you might find is someone who's wanting to move the relationship very quickly. It's like they fall head over heels almost overnight. Now, yeah, we can all do that. Do you know what I mean? But trying to move the relationship very quickly, trying to, you know, go from just dating to maybe wanting to move in together very quickly. So there could be someone moving very, very quickly. There's a lot of hyper emotional kind of my knight in shining armor, you're absolutely wonderful, or you know, you complete me, or whatever. There's a lot of that kind of, they call it love bombing. There's a lot of that kind of thing going on, but someone is moving very, very quickly. You might not necessarily be feeling the same way, and you might not even get a sense of, well, why are they feeling this way, you know? But that would be one sign. They're moving things very quickly. I think another sign could be they are almost, if I put it this way, they're almost too good to be true. In the sense that they agree with everything you say. Anything you're into, anything you like, oh, that's amazing. I love that too. It's almost like they become the perfect partner. They agree with everything you think, everything you do. All of a sudden, they're voting for the same people as you. They're going to the same church as you. You play guitar. Well, oh, do you know what? I play guitar as well. You know, but then you give them a guitar, they probably wouldn't know one end from the other. But one way or another, they agree with everything. They become the perfect partner, and it's almost like they're mirroring you.
Yeah.
What you might find as the relationship goes on, you might find little minor rejections, I would call them, maybe. And this would be maybe as things were progressing. Now, again, we're not always in the mood for a hug and a kiss. We might have other priorities, so we can't always do whatever it is. But it could be something as simple as every now and again, you know, you just reach out for a hug and they pull away. You know, you try to kiss them on the cheek and they move away. Or you'd plan to do something on the Friday night, and at the last minute, out of nowhere, for some reason, they can't go. They're either not in the mood, or a mysterious illness has come over them. They're very generalized examples, but they're little minor rejections. They're not overt kind of, go away, I don't want anything to do with you. They're little subtle abandonments, I suppose you would call them.
Yeah.
So there would be three things I think to look out for consistently happening.
Because it's interesting with the love bombing. I always thought that actually most people, when they fall in love, are going to effectively be love bombing because it's such an intense experience for them, isn't it? So they are going to think the chemicals mean this is the greatest person in the world and this is their soulmate and this is who they want to be with. And the problem might be that once those chemicals dissipate, then people revert to their usual way of attaching, which for a lot of people is not as loving as it could be. So actually, it just looks very like love bombing compared to what they subsequently become. But just think about the things that you said there, actually, with the love bombing. The more I hear people talking about people they got into relationship with where subsequently there are these real red flags, actually, I wonder whether some people they come into the relationship with quite a fragile sense of self. So to fall in love with somebody where they feel good about themselves, suddenly the conflict is over. Suddenly they feel the way they want to feel. So it's such a profound change in some people's experience of themselves and the world. If they come in quite wounded, it is a much more intense experience for them, perhaps falling in love. So I can see that it really could, if there are these underlying problems and narcissism, for example, how they could have a much more intense ways of demonstrating their love, which could be framed as it has been by love bombing. So it's not just the comparison with what they are afterwards. They actually could it means so much to them to fall in love with somebody and to be loved, considering what things were like before. In their normal default state, that it is a really powerful, intense experience.
It's a fantasy.
Yeah.
When people fall in love, we have idealized versions of each other. Now, I mean, everybody kind of love bombs each other, I suppose, in the early stages. A lot of romance and things like that. A lot of little surprise texts and jokes and funny things. A lot of passion and all the rest of it. But what people are doing is they're getting to know each other. They're getting to know about each other. In a relationship where someone is quite coercive, controlling, manipulative, narcissistic, the love bombing is something different. As I said a moment ago, it's like they become what you need. They become the ideal version of what you need. They become, it's like tapping into that part of us, which we all have, regardless of our attachment style. We all have this. That part of us that has this need to feel significant to someone, to feel important to someone. So they become the very thing, and we feel very important to them. So what we're really falling for is a fantasy, an idealized version. As time goes on, I sort of said a moment ago about the little minor sort of tiny abandonments and rejections. When those things happen, we're feeling a bit, what's wrong? Have I done something? Have I said something? Or maybe they're upset about something, and we're trying to pacify, we're trying to make them feel better, and we're trying to get that back. We're trying to get the ideal back. More often than not, it was never there in the first place. It was a fantasy.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are stuck trying to get that fantasy, still believing that there's maybe some part of it's real because they actually experienced it.
Of course, yeah.
They heard they had the passion, they had the flowers, the chocolates, they had the great times, the holidays, and all the rest of it. So to them, it was real, and they're trying to get that back.
And people will often say, "I'd like to go back to the way it was at the beginning," won't they? It's a very familiar thing, and but I think realistically, it's never going to be, is it? There's something quite particular that happens at the beginning of relationships. I mean, I think it doesn't dissipate into a state of trauma or for everybody. Of course not, because some people, I guess, have very well loved brains, and once those initial chemicals dissipate, they relate, they're securely attached, and there are ruptures sometimes, but people can regulate themselves, and it's okay. But I do think it's never going to be like it was actually. at the beginning? Because actually, as
No,
you say, it's quite a fantasy, artificial state. I mean, it's real biologically,
yeah.
physiologically, but it's not sustainable, I don't think.
It's I once heard someone say this, and I thought this was an amusing way of putting it. Whenever we meet someone for the first time, we fall in love, and we live like the Beatles.
Right.
All you need is love.
Yes.
But then after a few years together, there's bills to pay, there's the bin to leave out, there's kids to get to school, there's, other stuff.
Mm.
The two of you are lying in bed and you're thinking, you're living more like Tina Turner. What's love got to do with it?
Yes.
So, and I think what makes a relationship healthy is the fact that we can navigate those things. We're not head over heels with each other, but we do
Mm.
care very deeply about
Sure.
each other. We do feel safe and secure in each other's company. It's a relationship worth having. You both have the same values. You're both moving in the same direction, even if you're not on the same page all the time.
Mm.
But you can navigate and negotiate things a lot better.
Yeah. There is
In a
somewhere in the
relate,
middle, I guess, isn't there,
yeah,
between what's love got to do with it, and it's everything. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
In a relationship with someone who is maybe very high in narcissistic traits, it'll never be enough. You'll never ever reach the standard. You'll never be good enough.
Mm.
You'll never be perfect enough, and it's always about how they feel. And a lot of people in those relationships, before they waken up, if you will, before they realize they're continually trying to do or say the right combination of words that will bring them back
Mm.
to what they were like again whenever they first met. But again, that version didn't exist. It's not
Yeah.
real. It never was.
Mm. When you say it can never be enough, there is that critical side, isn't there? And it can often become that as a pattern, I think. But there's also the changeability of things as well, isn't it?
Mm.
Because people with highly narcissistic traits might do special and worthlessness, so they might go between the two at times. I think they can do that with the person that they're looking at as well. They can
Mm.
either be the best in the world or worthless. And that's very disorientating, isn't it? When you're looking at somebody you love and 1 minute you're the best thing in the world, and then at other times they look at you like they hate you. It's a
Yeah,
really difficult. And I
yeah,
think you have to, which we might come on to, is talking about how to make sure that it doesn't happen, so to speak. I think having a very solid sense of self, even with the best will in the world, though, I think it's hard in these circumstances in romantic
mm.
relationships, but having a very coherent, solid sense of self where you can, if somebody thinks you're the best thing in the world, you can see also, well, you're human and there are these difficulties. And if someone else,
Yeah,
and the same person saying you're the worst, well, what about all these things? I think that's important, isn't it? To have your own internalized, coherent
yeah,
sense of self in the face of someone who might be doing that.
absolutely. And I think what happens, again, talking about those early indicators. I mentioned about the little small minor rejections, the little tiny abandonments.
Mm.
One of them can be, for instance, talking about an ex-partner. Now, we all do that anyway.
Mm.
Again, we do it, but there's a context to it.
Mm.
Someone might ask us, how long were you together, or why did you break up? And we'll generally have a conversation, but the other person's talking about their ex as well. We're just exchanging information. If someone is bringing up their ex-partner, that could be for different reasons. It could
Sure.
be that it had been a very difficult relationship. Maybe
Yeah.
they haven't got over it yet, so you have to bear that in mind. And they haven't got over the toxic stuff they went through, which is fair enough. I think an indicator of something normal and healthy there is that they're trying to move forward in life.
Yeah.
But what you might find is someone who brings up their ex-partner, but one of those patterns could be they bring up the ex-partner every time you're alone.
Mm-hmm.
They don't talk about the partner when there's other people there.
Mm-hmm.
Just like they don't behave selfishly when other people are there. It is a way of keeping someone at an emotional arm's length.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I wouldn't even say it's a subtle, it's very in your face kind of rejection.
Mm.
What I said earlier on about that part of us that yearns to feel significant to someone, it's hard to feel significant to someone who's talking about someone else they were with
Yeah.
every time you try to get close to them.
Mm.
And that's one way of undermining your sense of self, your core.
Yeah.
What value am I here? Whether it's that or whether it's any kind of behavior you're not comfortable with. A massive, massive red flag is how they justify it. That's probably the biggest one. We talk about red flags. The biggest red flag, the biggest indicator is they are able to justify their actions and their behavior without taking into account the effect it has on you or anyone else.
Yeah. So within that, I guess there's lack of empathy, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's not taking responsibility for the impact or having any sense of someone else's reality. I often think exes are used, if somebody has those traits up high, as a comparison. It's often used as an implied way, an indirect way of criticizing someone as well, isn't it? They're used as sort of a stick to beat the new partner with. That's the reason they're often brought up. I think there's some comparison going on in a manipulative way, rather than directly saying, I'm disappointed by this, or I'd like this to be different. Exes can be pulled in to do that. And I always think, the way some exes can be idealized, and you always think, well, but you're not with them, so clearly it wasn't all that, was it? But they're being brought in for a reason, aren't they? And it is often
there are different reasons. In the early stages, you might be compared, but you're compared that they were never like that. They never appreciated that in me the way you do.
Yeah.
But as time goes on, it's she used to say that.
Yeah.
He used to do that. So again, it's that undermining that sense of self and your place in the relationship. There are different reasons for it, and one of them can be to test the relationship.
Yeah.
Which is an odd way of going about it. If you want to test your relationship, comparing someone unfavorably to someone else is probably not a good way of going about it.
No.
But it could be to test the relationship. Sometimes it can be to punish.
Yeah.
Which is another indicator. If you think, you might do or say something, you do something in your own best interest, or you disagree or whatever, and the next thing you know, the ex is dragged up and, they used to do that. They treated me the same way. And look at my distress. Look at my trauma. Is that not evidence of how bad you're being? So it can be to punish. It can also be to control and dominate. But I think someone who continually talks about their ex, and just on that, maybe not even just their ex, other people.
Yes.
Comparing you unfavorably to other people.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's difficult, isn't it? Because they're sort of, they actually sound quite direct in some ways. They're quite direct ways of criticizing, but they're also kind of indirect ways of getting somebody to change their behavior, aren't they? And I was thinking, when you were talking about kind of small gestures of withdrawal or abandonment, a red flag could be one of the ones I was talking about in the video, is that somebody might struggle to directly communicate what they feel, actually. And I suppose the sort of turning away, you don't quite know where you are, have you done something or not? It can be an acting out of feeling, isn't it? Perhaps they're angry and have disconnected, and the way they know is going to be hurtful, and demonstrate that is to act out that feeling by, say, turning away. And so I think whether somebody directly communicates or can directly communicate and has a belief that they're going to get a change in the relationship by communicating, I think an absence of that is a potential red flag with someone else. Of course, that's the situation, because they weren't able to directly communicate often for people and something be different for them in relationships. So they sort of learn other ways to do it. And I think comparisons with exes in a kind of critical way is one of those indirect ways of getting a need met, unfortunately. But it just doesn't work. It just annoys people.
Yeah, it's very clinical word, I suppose. It's maladaptive.
Yeah.
The very thing you're doing to try to get what you need or what you want, or to try to make things, improve things, whatever, is the very thing that's pushing someone away. This is the thing about empathy. Empathy is not just our ability to imagine what something would feel like for someone else. Empathy also gives us that ability to do a little bit of self-reflection. We can think inwards. We can think about the best course of action, whatever. And a lack of empathy, sometimes what we do is we just end up reacting, doing what we've always done. Doesn't matter how maladaptive it is. Not paying attention to the impact it's having on someone else, but also then getting angry because it had a negative impact.
Yeah.
A lot of people in narcissistic relationships said that they would be treated badly and then punished for not liking being treated badly.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
it makes no sense. If you're actually saw it written down on paper, it makes no sense.
No.
You don't know what's going on with some people. I think a
Yeah.
lot of the time it is that lack of ability to be able to self-reflect and for
Yeah. And it's difficult, we'll come on to possibly people coming out of relationships like that.
mm,
And often they will look back and try to make sense of it, of what happened, and try and go over it and think, well, that person said that. But actually, a lot of it doesn't make sense, does it? If you are in a
no,
relationship with somebody who struggles to take responsibility, who lacks empathy, who is always thinking in terms of defending themselves and criticizing you, it is quite a distorted way of seeing
yeah,
self in the world, isn't it? It's just not going to make sense or be coherent, unfortunately.
yeah. The only thing that, if you want to, boil it down to, it's very core, if you will, to try to make sense of it, to try to recognize that sometimes what you're dealing with is someone who is really struggling against reality.
Yeah.
They have, again, it goes back to the fantasy. Some people call it a
Mm.
delusion. It could be both.
Mm.
It's this delusional sense of themselves that they are flawless. They are
Yeah.
perfect. They've never done anything wrong in their lives. It's everybody else that's the way,
Mm.
Um, and people struggle with, how could you not get through to them? Why did they not see? So one moment they might have, but 30 seconds later it was completely rejected. Because of those defense mechanisms, they just kick into gear. Reality, the truth, whatever you want to call it, is it's gone. It's no,
Yeah.
it has to be shifted. The narrative has to be rewritten
Mm-hmm.
just to keep their false sense of self safe.
Yeah.
So when you recognize that, it doesn't matter what they did or what they said, it makes a little more sense. It's just a rejection of reality.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose coming on at some point we will, but just to look at why people stay and endure it as
Mm,
well. I mean, their sense of reality is being questioned, isn't it? Their body
yeah.
is telling them, and also their thoughts sometimes, probably other people, that this reality is distorted somehow. But they do often continue to sort of stay and
Yeah.
endure it. So I don't know. Perhaps we should have a look at that now. Why do you think? Well, initially, the not seeing it. We did perhaps touched on that in terms of the fantasy of
Yeah.
falling in love that
Well,
comes with falling in love with somebody initially, but also then moving on to perhaps why, when we see it and everybody's going, why are you doing that? And perhaps we're even saying, why am I doing this? And staying here, that why do people deny and endure?
well, if you remember, there's that part of us that wants to feel significant and important.
Mm.
What we have met is someone who is ticking every box, and they're treating us like we are the center of the universe. They're amazing, and they're telling us that we're amazing.
Mm.
We're sold this fantasy. Now, what happens is we get kind of hooked on the fantasy.
Yes.
It's a, how, to rephrase what you asked a moment ago, how do we know something it's bad and it's wrong, yet the other part of us is continuing to try? It's
Mm.
because it's like we split. We split. There's part of us is still invested in the promise, the
Mm.
the amazing future, the wonderful person that we fell in love with.
Yeah.
Part of us is still stuck there, and the other part of us is sometimes is a little bit lost. What's going on here, and why am I in this position, and so on. But every now and again, that other part of us that's stuck in the fantasy is trying to work even harder to make the fantasy a reality. But only one person's trying to do it. If you know what I mean. The other
Mm.
person's off doing their own thing. They
Mm.
care less. They're creating new fantasies. So we become stuck. We become stuck because we find this fantasy, the fantasy that we're going to have this amazing life, everything we've ever wanted. We will be loved, cherished. We're going to have this amazing future and all the rest of that sort of thing. We've also been led to believe that they are the only person that can give us this.
Yes. And they'll say that, won't they? Some people will say,
Yes.
you'll never find anybody like me. Compared to other people, that they're not like
Yeah.
me, I'm better than them. Those kind of, so
Yeah.
you'll often be hearing things from them that absolutely reinforce that
Yeah.
explicitly.
And during the early stages, talking about the love bombing, ISIS people are getting to know each other
Mm.
in a very coercive relationship. Someone has set out to manipulate. Um, that love bombing phase, what they're doing is they're finding out everything about you, your
Mm.
hopes, your dreams, your ambitions, but also your fears. your secrets, which we all have, the things that you're not proud of, the things that you regret, finding everything. And they become, as I say, the very thing that you need in life, the thing that you're led to believe will complete you.
Yeah.
Anyone listening, anyone watching, I'm going to tell you something now. Nobody completes you. You're already complete. Your partner will enhance you. That's all, not complete you. But anyway, enough of my ranting. You're led to believe they're going to complete you. And so that's what you're investing in. They're the only person who can do this. They're the only person that can save you, the only person that can give you. And every time you get that withdrawal, every time you get that abandonment, you're led to believe it's because of you. You didn't meet the mark. You are less than perfect. You asked for something in the wrong tone of voice. You were thinking of yourself whenever you did that. Do you know what I mean? So one way or another. But that part of us, because we're split, there's part of us still stuck in that fantasy. Richard Grant, and anyone listens or watches the Richard Grant, he calls it the Matrix, where part of us is still stuck in the Matrix, the false reality. Part of us is still stuck in that, and the other part of us is in the real world. And it's very, very hard to let go of that part of us that is stuck in there. Especially if it was a long period of time, especially, a few years, 10 years, whatever. Especially if there are maybe kids, especially if there are a lot of finances, maybe you have a mortgage together and so on. So there's a lot of different things going on.
Yes.
That keeps us stuck in that. Even though we know it's maybe unhealthy, it's not a good place to be. There's some of the things that keep us stuck there.
Yes, I mean, I was in the video which I did about navigating red flags. One of the things that I read is don't make any big life decisions like within the first year, for example, of the relationship. So in terms of children moving in, not that I would ever say that to a client clearly, but I think the thing that they're saying, of course, is that in the early stages, somebody will not be like that in a year's time. But what people might do is make very significant changes to their lives and incorporate, so to speak, or integrate this person into their life financially. Perhaps, children meet family members, but equally, that's something that people want to do when they fall in love, isn't it? It's really hard, of course, if this is their soulmate, and that's what love does for people. It makes often them think there's no other person in the world like this person. There'll never be. I mean, why wouldn't you integrate them into every aspect of your life?
We can become very irrational whenever we're in love. Absolutely. One of those indicators is that the person wants to move things very quickly.
Sure. Yeah.
That's one of the things. Now, as Richard was saying, you don't make any major decisions within a year. I don't know if a year's right or wrong. Fair enough. But this is someone who, they want to start doing this. They want to move in. They want to do that. They want you to give up your place and move in with it. There's a lot moving very, very quickly. Probably quicker than you might be comfortable, even though you might be in love. A bit quicker than you might be comfortable with. But there is that part of us that is investing in the fantasy, remember, in the delusion. So it doesn't do any harm to, I'll say, take a bit of time to get to know each other.
Yes.
Learn about the things that you're not happy with. Doesn't mean they're a bad person. Just get to learn about the things you're not comfortable about. Let them know about the real parts of you as well.
Yeah. And I think with the things that in another person that, may be difficult, outbursts of anger or manipulativeness, competitiveness, the thing I think with all of them is all human beings are going to come into relationships with difficulties, aren't they? I think there is that thing about a capacity to self-reflect at some point afterwards, curiosity about it. I know it might sound a bit therapy speak, but somehow looking at our part, connecting it perhaps with past relationships, what happened, seeing that sort of thing going on afterwards at some point, being able to do that together potentially. But I think it's an absence of those things, isn't it? Often, if you're looking at love bombing and then into being very critical about somebody's either totally in love or that person is the worst thing in the world. There isn't an overarching part that's kind of reflecting on their lives. That's more psychological mindedness, I suppose, would be of self-reflection, curiosity about things. And I think and a willingness to work on things that are difficult and take responsibility, not blame, but take responsibility for their part in things. As long as the difficulties come with those things, I think that's as much as we can hope for, I think, often in relationship.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a perfect relationship. What you have is a healthy one that works.
Yeah.
Going going back to what you're saying about the responsibility, something to think about in those early stages as well, the early stages of a relationship, something that might come up and it often gets overlooked is the responsibility. Now, they might tell you about how amazing they are, or they might, again, it could be the other way. They could be telling you how weak and helpless they are and they need rescued or whatever. But what you might find is someone who, everything you do to try and help them, there's a reason why it won't work. There's an issue, there's a problem. It's because of my issues, it's because of my trauma. And I'm not saying people don't struggle and they have emotional baggage and trauma.
Yeah.
All of us have something going on. The difference is this is someone who will tell you all about their problems and issues and the terrible things that happen to them, but they're not doing anything to work on themselves.
Sure.
It's like the rest of the world has to just put up with the fact that I have problems. And the rest of the world has to adjust to accommodate me.
Yeah.
And I think a big indicator of you're dealing with someone who's just, swinging a lead or pulling your leg or something is those issues only seem to come up in certain situations whenever it suits them. Because there's other times those issues don't seem to bother them. So, there's a little bit of manipulation going on there.
I mean, we've talked about the context of kind of falling in love in the moment with somebody and the effect that has on how we see them and how we would see ourselves in the relationship. What do you think the part of early experience might have to play for people in terms of it, not seeing it or then enduring it? Because I think quite a significant part for a lot of people in terms of why they would endure things as I say, not see it because they were familiar with it, actually. So there was something lacking, which has always been lacking in terms of relationships with others, in a caregiving relationship. And also some people have got used to, throughout early experience, I think, disconnecting from what they feel often, or certainly being conflicted a lot of the time, or being used to being in caregiving relationships where they feel annoyed or frustrated or disappointed. And that's part of all life and relationships, isn't it? But they're used to feeling that a lot. So I just wondered what you thought about the part of somebody's past.
I think our past experiences often inform the things we do and some of our decisions and so on, regardless of whatever the choice is. If you were to meet someone, for instance, who was narcissistic, but it's more like a vulnerable narcissism, covert narcissism, constant victim, they're helpless and all that sort of thing, what you might find is someone who gets into, it's like they found someone they can fix, someone they can rescue. It could be someone who's so used to putting everybody else in front of themselves. Trying to bring out the best in other people. There could be that, if you look at transactional analysis, I'm okay, you're okay. There could be that I'm okay when you're okay.
Yeah.
If you think of it as like a codependency, I will bring out the best in you, and then you will see the best in me. That need to be needed. So there can be little things like that going on. There can be again, when it is very, very manipulative, they have learnt as much as they can about you, and what they do is they tend to morph into what you need. So there can be that element too as well. You need, you didn't have that good a relationship with your dad. Well, what's the archetype of a dad? So all of a sudden you have someone who's maybe strong, disciplined, brave, ambitious, caring, protective, do you know what I mean? They become the very thing you think is missing in your life. And again, that's what hooks you in. So there can be different things that put it this way, whatever you feel is missing, not just the things you like, but whatever you feel is missing is the very thing.
Yeah.
It's like maybe an unspoken kind of thing, but it's almost the thing that's promised to you. They will become the very thing you think is missing. And that's what they leverage against you in the years to come. The part of us that does feel as if we need that is the bit that's maybe stuck in the fantasy. Not recognizing, first of all, there's no gold in that mine. There's no water in that well. It's empty. It's not there. Recognizing as well, we're already complete.
Sure.
If there's something we feel is missing, there's probably healthier places we can get it.
Mm-hmm.
and it wouldn't be as conditional as it is over there.
Yeah.
They'll hook you in one way or another is pretty much what I'm saying.
Yes.
If someone is manipulative enough, they will do that.
Yes. I mean, there is often, we use the word manipulation, we're talking about love bombing, and those kind of concepts, they do often come with an implication that somebody's deliberately doing it. What do you think about the fact that they don't really know what they're doing? Sometimes
Yeah,
people are, they're love bombing, as I say. I think some people love bombing, not because they're coming in thinking, okay, I'm somebody with highly narcissistic traits.
yeah,
What I'm going to do is hook this person in by being everything they want me to be, and then I'm going to ruin them. I'm not sure that a lot of people are consciously kind of thinking about that. I think that people will
not
often,
all the time.
they don't know whether they're the best thing in the world or the worst thing in the world, and suddenly they fall in love with somebody and they feel like the best thing in the world. So here comes all of this amazing stuff. You complete me. You are everything. I'm full of you. And then, as I say, that dissipates over time, and they have a fragile sense of self, so they get angry quickly. They're very changeable. They will act out their feelings rather than communicate things because they don't feel safe enough to communicate.
Yeah,
Quick to anger, all those kind of signs which might be consistent with.
emotionally dysregulated. Yeah,
Yeah, but it's often when people speak about people with narcissistic traits up high, they're often spoken about as if they would be deliberately doing. But there are lots of things that will be deliberate, but behaviour.
yeah,
And I'm not trying to excuse anything, but I think often people, they're sort of in what they're in, if you know what I mean. They're not
yeah.
necessarily, they don't even realise it, actually. That doesn't make it any less impactful or devastating for the other person. I just wonder what you think about that, the kind of.
I think when you're just talking about narcissism, now I'm talking about narcissism, not other things that are going on.
Mm,
Sometimes you might have someone and they're high in narcissism, not necessarily a disorder, but they might be high in narcissism. And what you really have is someone who's just like Alan Partridge
mm,
or David Brent from The Office. So you might have someone who is full of themselves. They
mm,
think they're important. They think they're the funniest person, the most important person. They're really buffoons, But so they can be narcissistic, but they're harmless in the sense that there's no malice in them.
mm,
Yes, they can become vindictive if you don't give them what they want, if they feel their ego's been wounded. But other than that, there wouldn't be what you would call bad people. They're more like pests, if you know
mm,
what I mean. I think when you're talking about more manipulative and where there is intent, I think you're talking about dark personality, and that's a
mm.
combination of different things. Narcissism is only one thing that's going on.
Okay.
There
Mhm.
is also psychopathy. Now that's being
Yes,
cold and callous.
sure.
That's having a disregard for others.
Sure. So
So
scammers, that kind of people, that
yeah,
exploitative, people that
it's
get into
parasitical.
relationships to take money, those kind of.
Yeah, it's parasitical as well.
Yeah.
So there's also Machiavellianism, and that's just being highly manipulative. The end justifies the means. They will do whatever they have to do, or they will tell you whatever they have to say
Mm,
just to get what they want.
mm,
And you are just a thing.
mm.
You're a resource.
Sure.
Doesn't matter how much they look into your eyes and tell you how amazing you are. All they're thinking of is what value you are to them in this moment. Can also be, this will be more dark tetrad, the dark triad. Dark tetrad also has sadism,
Hmm.
and that's just cruelty. That's inflicting cruelty on others, and it's either for your own fun, your own pleasure, or it's being cruel and vicious in order to control and dominate. So they might never actually even lift a hand,
Hmm.
but the implied threat's always there that they will if they have to.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? So
Hmm.
you put those four things together and you have someone who believes they are very entitled. They can behave any way they want because they're unique and special.
Hmm.
They're entitled to. They deserve the best. They are highly resistant to anything they would consider to be criticism.
Yeah.
They are highly disagreeable and there's a need for dominance.
Hmm.
But they're also very, very sneaky. And not just, as I say, the Alan Partridge kind of silly kind of nonsense that you would see.
Sure.
Very sneaky in the sense that they could be thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead of you.
Yeah.
they pretty much know what's coming next. And if it doesn't go the way they want it, again, that's when the psychopathy and the sadism kicks in.
Mm.
They do whatever they want, treat people whatever way they want. As I say, they're just a thing, just a means to an end. So sometimes you're dealing with that kind of person when we're maybe not in huge degrees. They could be small subclinical level traits, but it's still there.
Yes.
So sometimes, yes, you might have someone like that. Other times you just get someone, and as I say, they could be just like David Brent. There is this yearning to be loved.
Mm-hmm.
And when the very thing they're doing is the very thing that's pushing you away, and they don't get it. You're supposed to find me really funny. I'm amazing. I'm a celebrity and all that sort of thing. They are completely unaware of the impact they're having again because of that lack of empathy.
Yes, just don't think about it. Yeah. It doesn't change the impact that on the other person as far as their how they feel, but it isn't necessarily a deliberate thing. So yeah, I guess there is very much a spectrum there potentially, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. It's never a one size fits all. And when I'm talking to my channel, I might not always be talking about a disorder, but I would be talking about very high traits that are long term and persistent and pervasive. Because otherwise, if you were just to mention even being disagreeable, who isn't disagreeable from time to time? We have to be disagreeable. If we weren't disagreeable, we'd be doormats. We'd never get it. We wouldn't be able to negotiate for anything. So we all have different traits. When I'm talking on my channel, I'm talking about when the traits are up high and they're pretty much all day and every day.
Yeah. Going back to how we kind of navigate them as well. You were talking a bit about making, knowing that you are complete without this person. I suppose that goes to, and something that I was talking about earlier, about making sure your sense of self is pretty stable when we're in relationship or wherever we are, really, as a way of making sure that we're not going to endure or deny less than we deserve, which having consistent red flags over long periods of time, I would say, is not getting the love that we deserve in relationship. I mean, is there anything that we can do you think, firstly, dealing with the part when we get into a relationship and fall in love with somebody, that we don't see things? I mean, I think they're probably behaving differently anyway than they will subsequently. So it's not that we're not seeing them. They just don't do it, perhaps, early on. But do you think there is any potential in the early, I know it's all dealing with something quite abstract in some ways, but in the early stages of relationship of spotting things more or something more than people can do? I mean, people talk about looking very mindfully at someone, and the things I talk about in the video, looking not just at the things that they say, but also the things that they don't say. I mean, an absence of sort of, empathy sounds like something, paying attention to you. Well, I guess it's physically we can do that, but also, being interested, leaning into your interests. It sounds like something, doesn't it? And often if those things aren't there and there's a deficit in them because somebody isn't as loving as they, it's just not that present. That's not what their pathways are used for. Being mindful of the things that they're not saying, because we'll fill those gaps in, I think, with, they're just tired, or they do think that they just struggle to communicate it. They're not used to saying it. They're not very emotional, all those, but it is present. And sometimes it's just not present. It just wasn't at the beginning, but we'll just fill it all in with hope, I suppose, and our love for them, and project onto, if some people are very empathetic themselves, which is often somebody with the highly narcissistic traits might go for somebody like that, they just project empathy onto another person. I mean, that's what we might do, isn't it? Why would you not be empathetic to other people? It works well in relationship. Why wouldn't we do that? But going back to that, do you think there's anything that people can do in the early stage?
I'm a big believer in we learn from experience. Now, when I say we learn from experience, it doesn't mean if someone treats us badly, what we do is we expect everyone to treat us badly and we treat everyone with suspicion. That's not what I'm suggesting. We pay attention to the things that we believe we missed. If we were honest with ourselves, chances are we might not have missed them. Sometimes we did, by the way. But sometimes if they were consistently happening, it's not that we missed them. We may have ignored them, hoping they would go away.
Yeah.
And things would get better. And again, that's that part of us that is now caught up in that fantasy. Pay attention to, I suppose the biggest one, I'm just thinking, how do they react to no?
Yes. Yes,
Correct.
not getting what they want. You're not meeting their need.
They've
Yeah.
every right, by the way, to be disappointed.
Hmm.
And they've every right to try and talk you around, negotiate with you or whatever.
Sure.
How do they react to a no?
And also no being that somebody else is different and has a separate
Mm.
reality. And often people, when their narcissistic traits up high, somebody else doesn't have. The only
Yeah.
reality is their own reality, isn't it? People exist to the extent that they meet their needs. So a no means somebody's not going to meet their need, and somebody exists that that their thoughts and feelings are of equal importance that to mine, which is difficult for people, I think, who have those traits up high. It's difficult for them to accept, isn't
Mm.
it? So, as you say, it may always be disappointing. Someone's going to have an emotional response to a no, aren't they?
Yeah.
Which could be disappointment or frustration, but
Yeah.
it does depend on what then goes on to happen.
How do we negotiate? Well, if we're saying no tonight, well, that's okay. We'll do what you want tonight. Well, can we do this next Friday or something? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? How do they deal with that?
And if you see these things and it's there and you're in relationship, there you are, perhaps you're married, what would you say then to someone?
Speak to a therapist. Things to try and navigate it, and every situation is going to be different. But I would suggest you maybe go and do some couples counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily looking at people, getting a good therapist is not talking about who's to blame for this and who needs to change. It's about what two people do together to make
Sure.
something work a bit better. If you're in a relationship with someone who is maybe, say, on the dark tetrad, get as much advice and support as you need. You might find that you've been isolated.
Mm.
You might not have even seen your own family for a while. Your friends keep away from the door. You might have to be very careful. It could be someone who's checking your phone to make sure you're constantly accusing you of cheating and so on. One way or another, try to get as much advice as possible. There are a lot of organizations, agencies can advise you, that can find ways to, help you and so on. You can definitely speak to a therapist as well.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't always a case of just leave them. We can't always do that because there could be kids involved. There could be
Sure.
finances. And there's a lot of different things going
Mm.
on. If you can find a way to navigate your relationship and make it work, it might. You know what? You might not be love's young dream, but you could have something good.
Yeah.
Something reasonably healthy.
Yeah.
If it is difficult, toxic, and abusive, you can't make that work.
Sure. Do you see couples then?
I do, yeah.
Because I always think, it is often a coupling, isn't it? That more empathetic person with somebody whose narcissistic traits are up high. I don't see couples actually, but I think it must always be quite difficult to navigate that couple in some ways, because there is the fragility and in some ways the superiority sense of the person who has those traits up high. There might be the person who's much less likely to come into therapy. And I always wonder, how you challenge them within
Well,
the room, but make sure that they not make sure that's not your responsibility, but not to such a degree that they'll go, because they are likely to, aren't they? They're probably much more likely than the person who's much more empathetic, more psychologically minded, more reflective, more used to talking about their experience, perhaps already in therapy. I know this is stereotyping a bit, but I do wonder about that, because just to carry on from that, I have spoken to people. Of course, I see people who are in couples counselling. The way they describe it, I would say I would characterise them perhaps more as the kind of empathetic person in the couple. The other person does have those traits up much higher, it would
yeah.
seem, definitely in how it's presented to me. But what they can often say is that they have a therapist there who I know this isn't how they would say it, but if you were to summarize it, lets the narcissistic person off with quite a lot.
Mm.
They don't necessarily call out behavior that could be abusive but I can see what a therapist is trying to do, is
Yeah.
trying to maintain this therapeutic relationship. But it sort of goes on to the fact that a lot of therapists' personality, I think, can be much more those empathetic people. And I would say generally what we don't want, and I talk about this in the third video that I did, is our empathy, I suppose, to be at the expense of our protection. And I think that can happen in relationships with, if you fall in love with somebody, it disables protection. It might disable our critical function, our problem finding function. I think that is what happens for a lot of people initially. But just also carrying that on through, some people might see that in their therapist as well, actually. We can be people that will try to look in the compassionate, always persevere, always trust, always, those kind of much more, you might say, loving qualities, because that's often what clients need to be in relationship with. But it is interesting. It just made me think of it when you were talking about it. If you're in there with that couple and someone is clearly, engaging in behavior which is really problematic, it must be quite a difficult thing to.
Well, it's the thing, and this is my experience, it's personal experience. When couples come, there may be a lot of things going on. You might have someone, even both, who are not listening to each other. That doesn't necessarily mean they're narcissistic. It means they have been fighting, arguing for so long. It's like they've forgotten how to communicate.
Sure.
And sometimes it is working to build things like the communication. Sometimes you have two completely different kinds of people. You're right. You might have someone who's very highly compassionate and empathetic and all the rest of it. Then you get another one who's maybe very pragmatic. They're just a problem solver, And again, so it's not that one's good and one's bad. It's just what you have is different.
Yeah.
And it's how do you get them to work together? Because in the early days of the relationship, those two things probably complemented each other quite well.
Sure.
When it comes to someone who is very highly narcissistic, it's highly unlikely they will engage fully in the therapy. And if they do, well, when I say engage fully, they might not stick at it. Because what could happen is they might go to therapy because something is really bothering them, struggling. They're terrified. It's like their world is starting to collapse, and so they could be panicking over something. There could be, they might lose their job or whatever. There could be real problems going on with them. As soon as the issue either passes, it's not as bad as they thought, or do you know what? They got away with it, or whatever. Don't bother with the therapy anymore. They don't need it. Again, so there's that lack of self-reflection that it was my behavior led to this, but it wasn't as bad as I thought. So I don't need this now. Do you know what I mean? So I've kind of butchered what some of the literature says there, but I put it in sort of a Reader's Digest kind of bite-sized nugget.
Yeah. So I suppose if you're looking at another person, perhaps if they do have those traits, consistently working at something, whether that's through therapy or all kinds of ways people can reflect and look at their personality and what things are like. But seeing that in another person can give hope, can't it? It can be perhaps, as you say, the solution isn't always leaving someone necessarily. People can work together. And one of the things that I was saying in the video as well is when, if you might have somebody more covertly narcissistic who's coupled up with somebody very narcissistic, it's not always narcissists and empaths, is it? That couple up together. But when those two people potentially work together or on their separate journeys and work their way through something to be more connected, however you look at it, or be more loving, to have gone through that experience together can be an amazing thing for the relationship, can't it? It's been so interesting. Thank you so much for your input there. I mean, is there any sort of final thoughts you would like to say about the issue?
No, I'm only, I appreciate you having me on again and to engage with you and your audience. So I've enjoyed our chat.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Thanks, Darren. That's been great. And hopefully we talk again soon.
Absolutely.